Well, good afternoon to you. 406 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, 4:30, we talk to the White House correspondent for the Daily Signal, the man who may lose his credentials soon because the White House keeps on kicking out independent media. Fred Lucas will be here. At 5:30, Eileen O'Connor is here. She is the former Assistant Attorney General for the Tax Division of the United States Department of Justice. And we'll ask her about the special treatment that the Biden family has been receiving from our nation's investigators through the years, as laid out today by those important and brave whistleblowers. More on that coming up. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Our next guest is an investigative reporter for the Daily Caller News Foundation, and she covers in great detail America's border crisis, and she happened to be walking around in Washington, D.C. yesterday, and what do you know, she ran into the DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. For more on what that experience was like, we turn now to Jennie Taer, who joins us on the phone. Jennie, great to chat with you again.
Thank you for having me, Vince.
So, Jennie, set this up for us. So what was going on yesterday that led you to be on the same sidewalk as Alejandro Mayorkas?
Right. So I absolutely did not expect to see him anywhere and wasn't looking for him, but I happened to be, I guess, in his neighborhood where he was walking his dog, and he was in my line of sight. And as soon as he got within an earshot, I identified myself as a reporter for the Daily Caller News Foundation, and I simply asked him about the latest border numbers that had come out just maybe an hour before encountering him. These numbers showed that while illegal immigration is down, the Biden administration is conducting a historic program where they're allowing numbers that we haven't seen before of people to enter the country through ports of entry.
Yes.
Through what's known as CBP-1, a phone app that basically gives them the opportunity to cross legally if they so choose, essentially.
Right. So we went from illegal immigrants pouring into the country to the Biden administration instead trafficking them in and then claiming that the illegal immigration numbers are down.
Right. And Mayorkas did not want to talk about this. He did not even answer my question. And I actually ended up encountering him a second time and said to him flat out, "You did not answer my question earlier about the southern border.
Yes.
Do you want to respond?" And he walked away immediately. And I think this is just, something that is a trademark here of what I've seen covering DHS and this administration. When it comes to the border issue, they're very careful about their messaging with it because what's happening does not look good for them.
Yes.
And while they have been seeing low numbers of illegal immigration, it's still not, historically low. It's very high still. You still had 100,000 people cross illegally last month in the month of June. And then you're seeing this rise in people coming through ports. The other element of the issue with this program the Biden administration is using to bring people through is that they say that the program is meant to allow people to come without the fear of encountering any danger along the journey or enriching the cartels. However, the only way to actually access the app is by being present in central or northern Mexico. And if you're coming from China or if you're coming from Venezuela, you still have to make that dangerous journey.
Yes. In other words, the cartels are being enriched. In fact, maybe even more so by this U.S. government decision. Let me play some audio of your encounter yesterday because thankfully, being a good reporter, you captured it. Here is the Daily Caller News Foundation's Jennie Taer encountering Alejandro Mayorkas while he was walking his dog.
Hi, Mr. Secretary. Jennie Taer with the Daily Caller News Foundation. Just curious what you make of the border numbers being down right now. The illegal encounters are low, but you're bringing people through the ports of entry. Do you have an answer to that? Do you have any explanation? You're still bringing people through.
You heard him say in that clip, I'm sorry at first because he maybe had some trouble hearing you or who you were, and you clarified. And then as soon as he was able to establish that you were asking about the border, I correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like he said, "Oh, please," and he just went walking off.
It was hard for me to tell, but I definitely got the sense that he did not want to talk to me. And this is not the first time I've encountered that from a Biden administration cabinet member. As you probably remember, I had encountered Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg actually during his debacle with East Palestine, and got a similar, if not maybe more upset reaction from him. They don't like to be outside of these coddled settings where they have their press secretaries standing in the corner with a list of reporters to call on, where sometimes they pre-screen questions, and it's comfortable and it's on message for them. This was not.
I know. In fact, this is the old audio of you asking Pete Buttigieg about East Palestine, Ohio, which was covered in a toxic cloud, and Pete Buttigieg took weeks to even get there. Remember, Joe Biden has promised he would go. He has not gone, and the Biden administration clearly hoping America forgets he ever made that promise. Here's what it sounded like when you spoke to Pete Buttigieg.
Secretary, what do you have to say? Hi, how are you? Good. Jennie Taer with the Daily Caller News Foundation. What do you have to say to the folks in Ohio, East Palestine, who are suffering right now?
Well, I'd refer you to about a dozen interviews I've given today, and if you'd like to arrange a conversation, be sure to reach out to our press office, but I'd like to have that conversation with you. Just walk
you don't have a message for them?
I do, and I shared it with the press many times today. I'd refer you to those comments.
Would you mind sharing it with us?
No, I'm going to refer you to the comments that I made to the press because right now I'm taking some personal time and I'm walking down the street.
Are you going down there?
What's that?
Are you going down there at all?
Yeah, I am.
When are you going?
I'll share that when I'm ready.
Okay, thank you.
Can I get a photo of you?
Can I get a photo of you? Remember, he took a picture of you, and then nobody ever told you how he was going to use the photo.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have had a Freedom of Information Act request for information about that photo and the communications related to that encounter, and we have not received anything. The department continues to tell us that they're going to update us with information, and we have yet to receive any clarity on that situation as well. So they definitely, again, it's showcasing what the messaging is looking like when a press secretary is not around.
So, Jennie, just to be clear, nobody is tipping you off to where these cabinet officials are. You just happen to have the same walking pattern as all of them?
I guess so. I'm not. And just to vindicate myself, I'm currently on crutches, so I wasn't really intending to go very far or chase anyone down. And as you can see, I let him go yesterday.
Wait, so when you saw Mayorkas yesterday, you were on crutches asking questions, and even then he regarded you with contempt and he blew you off, a poor, struggling, crippled woman?
Oh, I have no idea. Maybe I really threw him off or something. But yeah, that's, was not intentional again. And maybe his reaction was for that. I don't know.
I also want to point out that you're asking normal questions. These are not ambushy questions. They're not the kind of thing that's meant to be provocative. It's just like, hey, tell me about your job. And all these officials seem to get really ticked off about this. Here's the second half of your conversation with Mayorkas as he walked his dog back to his house. Jennie Taer and Alejandro Mayorkas.
Secretary, I asked you a question earlier about the southern border and you refused to answer.
Remember, she's on crutches as she's doing this.
Sir, are you sure you don't have anything to say? Nothing? The numbers are still high, 100,000 people. People brought through the ports of entry, nothing? Okay.
And then at this point, Mayorkas runs up and kicks one of her crutches out and then runs off. It was a crazy scene. No, I'm just kidding. That didn't happen. But Jennie, he did have security with him, didn't he? Like some sort of security that was tailing him?
Yeah, there were two security guards from what I could see. No one was, pushing me away. There was no one indicating that I was an imminent threat or anything. He kind of took matters into his own hands, it appeared, to move away. And in both instances. Yeah,
the crutches lady was not a threat. Excellent assessment by the security force there at DHS. Okay, well, Jennie, thank you. Please keep this up. These guys are public servants and should answer these questions. They're really simple, and of course, they're not answering them because they have contempt for the public and, by extension, you. Jennie, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
That's Jennie Taer of the Daily Caller News Foundation. Let me return to the issue of what's going on in today's congressional hearing as these IRS whistleblowers keep laying out all of these details of the ways in which the Bidens got special treatment. Gary Shapley One of the guys testifying today, you know his name because he was the first IRS whistleblower to go public. He's the supervisor. He's the guy who was running the whole thing. He's a 14-year special agent with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. He's currently the supervisor of 12 elite agents in the International Tax and Financial Crimes Group. And here's what he had to say today about why he was a whistleblower and why he was testifying.
I'm not here to support partisan agendas on either side. I'm here because our tax system relies on the American people having confidence it is administered fairly and equally for everyone, regardless of your last name or political connections. If the handling of this case was inappropriate, it doesn't matter whether it happened under a Republican or Democrat administration. Whether you agree with my concerns about the unethical slow walking and preferential treatment in this case, you can be sure that my testimony is true and correct to the best of my ability.
And as you know, great portions of this were happening under the Trump administration. So, if these Democrats were serious people, and they're not, but if they were serious people, they could engage on that front. Well, wait a sec, I can't believe this was happening. Why was a politically connected figure being given special treatment? Why was a politically connected family being given special treatment? No such questioning from the Democrats today. Instead, we get a lot of orange man bad. But Gary Shapley is undeterred.
In April 2022, in a hearing, Attorney General Garland was asked how the American people could be confident the administration was conducting a serious investigation into the president's own son. Attorney General Garland responded by saying, because we put the investigation in the hands of a Trump appointee. He led Congress to believe the case was insulated from improper political influence because all decisions were being made exclusively by Delaware United States Attorney David Weiss.
Now, let me point out something. He brings up this Trump appointee line. The Democrats kept emphasizing it, too. They were like, he's a Trump appointee. He's a Trump appointee, Trump appointee. He was hand-selected by Democrats. David Weiss was chosen for the position of U.S. Attorney for Delaware by the 2 Democrat senators from Delaware. It was their choice, and they passed it off to Trump. They asked for it. Trump delivered it. But it was on their recommendation that David Weiss became the U.S. Attorney for Delaware. That's the truth. If anybody handpicked him, it was Democrats.
But that was not true. The Justice Department allowed the president's political appointees to weigh in on whether to charge the president's son. After United States Attorney for D.C., Matthew Graves, appointed by President Biden, refused to bring charges in March 2022.
Yeah, because he's a Biden hack. These are very simple things to calculate here.
I watched United States Attorney Weiss tell a room full of senior FBI and IRS senior leaders on October 7th, 2022, that he was not the deciding person on whether charges were filed. That was my red line.
Yes, and an indicator that Attorney General Merrick Garland lied to Congress. Lied to Congress. He said that David Weiss had full authority to pursue the Bidens. Weiss telling government investigators that it is not true. I don't have the authority. I can't pursue this.
In November of 2022, the statute of limitations was set to expire for the 2014 and 2015 charges in D.C., which included the 2014 felonies for the attempt to evade or defeat tax and fraud or false statement regarding bereavement income earned by Hunter Biden in those years. The statute of limitations had been extended through a tolling agreement with Hunter Biden's defense counsel, and they were willing to extend it past November 2022. Weiss allowed those to expire.
Yeah.
Prosecutors presented the 2017, 2018, and 2019 criminal tax charges to the Central District of California around September of 2022.
Yeah, there's that Trump appointee allowing all of these really important charges to run past their statute of limitations. You can't go after Hunter anymore because the government delayed everything into eternity.
Only after President Biden's nominee, Martin Estrada, was confirmed. In January of this year, I learned Estrada had declined to bring the charges. For all intents and purposes, the case was dead with the exception of one gun charge that could be brought in Delaware.
Yeah, and even that has been turned into nothing. He went nuts, as is fitting for his name. Kwesi Mfume today rips up his own remarks on the dais and screams that Hunter Biden has done nothing wrong. He's totally fine. He's taking responsibility, blah, blah, blah.
And yet we are doing this all over again for the Hunter Biden show to someone who has pleaded guilty and has taken responsibility for not filing taxes for 2 years. This is ludicrous. Beam me up, Scotty. There's no intelligent life down here. None.
Oh, and he rips it up, Nancy Pelosi style. He rips it. It's his own remarks, though. I don't know. Why is he ripping up his own questions? So there's Kwesi Mfume today. Also, another moment from Kwesi when he says this.
Here's what galls me. I don't like these attacks on the Department of Justice, the FBI, the IRS.
Oh, he hates when people pick on the government. I don't like these attacks on the DOJ, the FBI, and the IRS.
I don't like these attacks on the Department of Justice, the FBI, the IRS, as if they are somehow anti-U.S. agencies. Those agencies keep this democracy in check. It keeps them afloat.
Oh.
They provide the checks and they provide the balances.
No, they don't. What constitutional is he reading? I mean, the three branches of government provide checks and balances of one another. It's not supposed to be the DOJ, the FBI, and the IRS provide checks on the American people. That's the checks and balances. That's you have no idea what you're talking about, Kwesi. That is not what's happening here, or not what should be happening here. In fact, that's kind of haunting, isn't it, to hear a Democrat congressman say, a lawmaker, an elected representative, to sit up there and say that the only thing that's keeping our, quote, democracy in check is the out-of-control Justice Department, FBI, and IRS. Tyrants, all of them. And you've got some FBI whistleblowers, IRS whistleblowers, an FBI whistleblower earlier this week, and two IRS whistleblowers out today saying, no, there are problems. It is becoming full-blown tyranny. You've got people covering up for the Bidens, and we won't stand for it, and we are willing to subject ourselves to the personal and professional destruction that the left is going to bring upon us and already is. More on this unbelievable hearing today with these IRS whistleblowers. That's ahead. Also, we'll be joined by the White House correspondent for the Daily Signal, Fred Lucas. Speaking of tyranny, the White House looking to boot him out for asking questions. That's ahead. Good afternoon to you. 4:35 here at News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Eileen O'Connor joins us at 5:30, former Assistant Attorney General for the Tax Division of the United States Department of Justice. We'll get her reaction to everything we've learned today from these IRS whistleblowers, Gary Shapley and Joe Ziegler, as they lay out in jarring detail the extent to which the government has been subverted to the advantage of the Biden family. And you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. I want to turn now to an issue of what's going on at the Biden White House. You by now know of the plight of Simon Atiba, the chief White House correspondent for Today News Africa. The White House is looking for ways to boot him entirely from the press briefing room. They don't like his questions. They don't like him asking questions. They don't like him. They'd like to get rid of him. But he's not the only person or outlet they're looking to exclude from covering the White House. In fact, that list appears to be growing. Today, we get information about a great news organization called the Daily Signal, and their longtime White House correspondent, Fred Lucas, appears on the edge of being kicked out of the White House as well. And so for that story, I want to turn to Fred Lucas. He joins us on the phone. Fred, good afternoon to you. Good to have you here on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
Fred, tell me what's happening with the White House right now, and start with, if you could, how long have you been covering the White House and going to that briefing?
Yeah, I've covered the White House going back to 2009, actually, with Barack Obama. I've had the hard pass since that time, and I actually had fairly good relationships, I thought, with the Obama press team and the Trump press team. There was never really a purging in either of those administrations. You did have a couple times where the Trump administration took aim at a couple of individual reporters, but this is sort of a larger scale purging, and the White House is not being at all forthcoming or transparent about how many people this affects.
Yeah, when the Trump administration targeted reporters, as you just mentioned, it was typically behavioral disputes. They didn't like how Jim Acosta was getting into tug-of-war matches with interns, or Brian Karam, the Playboy reporter, would constantly be interrupting. And so they tried to get some of these guys kicked out. But Fred, my impression of you is not that you are a disruptor or that you're constantly interrupting events. You're You're just kind of there doing your job. You ask questions when you get an opportunity, and you cover the White House.
I was there. And I did shout out a question during a briefing about whether the administration thought whoever brought cocaine into the White House should be arrested.
Sure.
She didn't answer my question, but some other reporters actually picked up on that question and asked it, so I was happy about that.
Yes.
But I've never interrupted or was a disruptor. Or
right. But so, in other words, nobody would
rude or
accuse
anything
you
along
of
those
being
lines.
impolite. I mean, you're just asking questions.
Hey,
That's all.
no.
So
Yes,
how did we get
exactly.
to this moment where the Daily Signal is on the chopping block and that you might be removed from the White House? What's happening here?
Well, what they set out a new criteria for this around late May or so, and sent it out to all hard pass holders. They introduced into the criteria was that you had to be either registered or credentialed to cover the Congress or the Supreme Court. We are currently not, and that is because Daily Signal, as part of the Heritage Foundation, is and generally for-profit organizations cover Capitol Hill.
I'm sorry. So you broke up a little bit, but what it sounds like you said, and
yeah.
I think I understand, is that in order to get a congressional hard pass, that is to cover the House and the Senate, to be a journalist, normally the rule has been that you have to work for a for-profit news organization, not a nonprofit. You work for the Heritage Foundation, so it's a nonprofit. That's the rule by which Congress is keeping you out of the hallways. And the White House is now saying we're going to adopt the same policy?
Yes. And to be clear, the Daily Signal is an independent news organization, but yeah, we're a division of the Heritage Foundation.
Yeah, I mean, and by the way, if the whole point is to try and filter out organizations that have a point of view, you're going to have to remove a lot of organizations from the White House press briefing.
Right, quite a bit.
So I remember in the talking points memo has been a part of the in-town White House press pool and had hard passes. You've got, which is a full-blown left-wing, they say it, organization. The Advocate, which is literally, they call themselves the Advocate. They're a gay news organization dedicated to gay issue advocacy. They're in the White House. They're covering events. No.
Yeah, and actually, there's no reason they shouldn't be.
Right.
Listen, I think it sounds trite to say this is not about me, but I'm going to say it. This is not about me, and it's not about any one reporter that's going to be eliminated here. What this is about is you don't want the government, the administration, deciding what press and what media gets to cover them.
Exactly.
And you do not want that in a Republican or a Democratic administration. And if this precedent that the Biden administration is setting here can easily go into a Republican administration too, and the left might decide they don't like that. And we've seen this a few times in the past where the left doesn't like the new rules that they set for things. So I think, and also I think this is a problem here, is that this could be a first step. I mean, they found a niche where they might be able to purge some news outlets they deem to be unfriendly.
Yes.
That through one step of not be credentialed on Capitol Hill, they might look for other areas where they can also purge more.
But there's an organization that's tasked with looking out for these types of issues, because the job is to try and ensure press access rather than to constrict it, and that job is managed by the White House Correspondents Association. Their job is to advocate on behalf of the collective reporters at that White House. That would include you, Fred Lucas. So what is the White House Correspondents Association doing here?
Right now, they have been mostly silent on the policy change. Some of that, I think, is attributable to the fact that we just recently had elections in which the leadership has changed and terms for the president and the board has expired. So I am hopeful something's going to come forward on that. We'll see a position taken.
I mean, I guess I know that you're hopeful here. Has anybody talked to you at all? Can you at least tell us that?
No, not from the board. No.
Okay. Well, that seems like a problem, right? Because if you were going to fight for anything, it'd be for press access, because if they can do it to the Heritage Foundation guy, the Daily Signal guy, they can start doing it to other outlets as well. And before you know it, only lickspittles are going to be in the room. And that's not the way you actually get interesting information, important information out to the public, Fred Lucas.
Right. And again, I mean, the reason why I think a regular person should care about this is that, you do not want just friendly media in there, compliant media covering a president, and also you don't want the threat of losing your credentials hanging over you if you're not deemed compliant media. That's what we're looking at now.
I do get the impression that it's almost like with the Simon Atiba saga has provided for the White House some sort of useful window wherein they can start banning a bunch of other news outlets that they don't like under the cover of Simon Atiba, right? So the idea is that Simon is constantly mixing it up with them. The press and the White House seems to be unified for the most part in saying that he's a bad actor in the press briefing room. He isn't behaving himself. He's interrupting his colleagues. They have all sorts of justifications. And this is all leading to what appears to be an inevitable banishment for Simon Atiba. And it seems that under that event, they're going to go after guys like you, Fred Lucas, too. If we also bring up the Jim Acosta comparison with Simon, with Jim Acosta, I was not for that either. I mean, I didn't think they should, in that case, try to pick who right
the press corps. But in that case, the White House made a case that they thought he broke decorum. The White House could easily make a case that they thought Simon broke decorum, or they could set forth a set of rules of decorum that they expect. They didn't do that. They went a very sneaky way. They sent on a Dear Colleagues letter, and then they put forward these new guidelines that is going to be eliminating a whole swath of reporters in the press room.
I noticed, though, that when Jim Acosta was booted from the Trump White House, CNN took that issue to court and got him reinstated lickety-split. Are you and your organization contemplating what will happen if the White House bars you in the weeks ahead?
We are looking at that, yes. Not ready to say anything on that yet. So.
Okay, but you're seriously contemplating your options, in other words?
Yes, of course.
Okay. All right, well, Fred Lucas...
As I'm sure others are, too. So.
Yeah, I hope so. Are there other news organizations that I haven't brought up or that we're not aware of who may be subjected to this?
I think quite a few more independent organizations or independent reporters, and that's why, in some ways, the Daily Signal doesn't fit this, because in some ways they're targeting some maybe independent reporters, whereas we're a full newsroom here. That's why this is so unusual.
It's getting really crazy. Please stay in the fight, because your questions are always worthwhile. Fred Lucas, again, with the Daily Signal. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, glad to be here.
All right, this is Fred Lucas. And it really, I realize that, this is one of those stories where it kind of feels like, well, it's kind of like a journalism industry thing. Yeah, that's true. It definitely is. But this is about whether or not the protections afforded by the First Amendment actually have any meaning whatsoever. You've got to have reporters asking adversarial questions, provocative questions, probing questions in front of government officials. Otherwise, what's the point? Just let these guys post it on Twitter. If the White House wants to just publish everything on Twitter, press releases, what is the difference between that and an MSNBC segment other than moving pictures? Nothing. It's the same thing. So you need somebody in there asking real questions who is not trying to drive the agenda of the administration. So good for Fred Lucas staying in this fight, but this is this is one of those stories that I'm telling you now, I'm giving you some warning in advance that things could go south very soon for a bunch of outlets that you like, who do get an opportunity every so often to throw a question at Coringe or any of those government officials. And that's an important role, a really important role for our country. So that's the battle that Fred Lucas and the Daily Signal. Yeah, that's a crazy story, too. I've got so much to get to. So much to get to. Here is the IRS whistleblower hearing just moments ago. The child Congressman Maxwell Frost, I guess they let a kid do it every so often, from Florida, says that Republicans are wrongly complaining about a two-tier justice system that is targeting Republicans. In fact, it's not what they say. Here is Maxwell Frost.
And since January 6th, these Republicans and Trump have complained about a two-tiered justice system, co-opting the language of the decades-long civil rights movement for Black lives and Black freedom.
You don't represent any civil rights movement. You do not. You do not represent any civil rights movement. The American right represents civil rights, and it always has, and it seems like it always will, based on the pacing here, based on how everything is going. We just had a gigantic victory, a series of victories in the United States Supreme Court for civil rights that people like Maxwell Frost were against. They hate this. They want racial prejudice inside of every institution in our country. The people fighting on behalf of civil rights, they're not for that. They don't want racial prejudice baked in. Maxwell Frost. So again, this is all projection. He's inverting the truth here and co-opting, appropriating the language of decency.
Co-opting the language of the decades-long civil rights movement for Black lives and Black freedom, a movement that they actually are actively looking to eliminate. There is a two-tier justice system, but it's not about Democrats versus Republicans. This language, two-tier justice system, has a real history. It has a real history of Emmett Till. It has a real
Democrats killing Emmett Till.
With Breonna Taylor. It has a real history with George.
Breonna Taylor. You remember what happened in that story? The cops banging on the door to come into the apartment, and when they came in, Breonna Taylor's boyfriend in the hallway opens fire on the police. They return fire, striking Breonna Taylor. That's what happened. That was not what the claims were at the outset, that Breonna Taylor was sleeping in her bed and it was a mistake, the apartment, and then they killed her. It was like all these lies, just like so many of these stories. These lies that were meant to divide the country and to whip people up into a panic and a frenzy.
Real history with George Floyd, the Central Park Five.
George Floyd? The two-tier system of justice was with George Floyd. What happened in the George Floyd case? The cops involved there were found guilty of murder. What's the two-tier justice system he's referencing? The entire nation's business not only ground to a halt, but sections of some of our cities were allowed to be burned to the ground in the interest of pursuing, in the interest of supporting George Floyd. We had the summer of George Floyd. We had the George Floyd riots. If George Floyd is an expression of anything with regards to two tiers of justice in our country, it's that if you burned a government building down on behalf of George Floyd, chances are you were getting away with that and will never be charged with a crime. That's the two-tier system of justice.
Derek D. as a young man who was just an unarmed young man who was just killed in Central Florida not but a week ago.
Yeah, okay. So anyway, Maxwell Frost, 26 years old, sitting up there lecturing everybody about how they don't actually know history. And I'll tell you history. I'll tell you about the two-tier system of justice. Maxwell Frost has his head fully up his rear end. He may as well have been one of those photos that Marjorie Taylor Greene was holding up of Hunter Biden in compromised positions. He's just a ridiculous human being. And he's kind of perfect. He's like one of the kids that the left is constantly churning out. Did you see the polling out right now that a majority of people who are either in college or were recently graduated college, a majority of them say that the Supreme Court is bad because they didn't let Joe Biden forgive student loans. Yeah, because it was unconstitutional, dummies. They're churning out morons. Let me take Perry in Maryland real fast here. Line 3. Perry, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, I usually listen to you when I'm in the car, but I'm working from home, and I'm looking at this crap, and I'm glad you're on it. I'm so glad I left that party. I think everybody in the Democratic Party is retarded. They make no sense. They talk about this race and killing babies. That's all they know.
That's all they know. And it's all they push. Race and killing babies. It's disgraceful. It really is. Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, out earlier this week saying that unless the military kills more babies, it won't be ready for war. That's not the kind of lethal military we were talking about. That's something very different. Coming up, we're going to be joined by Eileen O'Connor in the next hour. She worked in tax enforcement in the federal government, and she's got some thoughts about what we're hearing in this IRS whistleblower hearing.